Part 10. The Triple Crown. The Triumvirate and the Tripartite Crown. The concept of a triple crown first came into manifestation in Rome during the reign of Julius Caesar, known as the Triumvirate, or three-headed rule. In the last 500 years, a new triumvirate has been put in place on a global scale. At the same time, during the revolutions of the late 1700s and through the 1800s, monarchical heads of state functioning under the historical basis of the divine right of kings that was indoctrinated into the mass consciousness over thousands of years in ancient civilizations were progressively replaced, where the state became the sovereign with progressively more autocratic authority and vested divinity. Many who have studied these ideas and historical facts know that we currently have three city-state sovereign entities that control the world. When we look at the flag of Washington, D.C., we see the two fundamentals that control the whole system: the three five-pointed stars and the two pillars lying sideways. Notice the dollar symbol superimposed on Sisyphus's boulder above. It is comprised of the same two pillars and is intertwined with a serpent that represents the DNA as the genetic code of life, like the ribbons the children wrap around the maypole every year on May 1st. On the DC flag, the two pillars are horizontal in a prone, prostrate position, and above them are the three stars. The three stars represent the three city-states that control the commercial law, the kingdom law, and the canon law via the District of Columbia, City of London, and Vatican City, respectively. The two pillars represent the law of the priest and the law of the king, also known as the law of the church and the law of the state, both controlled by the Triple Crown. They are horizontal as they are now subordinate to the three sovereign entities. At the same time, just as in the religious construct of the Trinity being a singular God, so too is this Trinity, the three made as one, all contained within the triple crown of the one intended to sit on the throne of the world through the embodiment of the Pope. That sums it up in its entirety right there. In the year 1302, Pope Boniface VIII issued the papal bull Unam Sanctum, in which he essentially claimed absolute right to all land, all flesh, and all souls via, quote, "Submission on the part of every man to the Bishop of Rome is altogether necessary for his salvation." End quote. This was solidified in further papal bulls to follow over the next 235 years, all inclusively referred to as the doctrine of discovery, through this claim of absolute control of these three essential elements of life on earth. This is also known as the triregnum, or thrice royal of the Triple Crown, and this Triple Crown was instituted in succeeding centuries as the three city-states of Vatican City, City of London, and Washington, D.C. To show the readers of this document the context and nature of these supposedly divinely inspired and absolutely supreme mandates from the so-called Vicar of Christ, let's have a brief look at some of the content of the doctrine of discovery from 1302 to 1537 in the three testamentary trusts and other declarations of that period. Unam Sanctum, papal bull promulgated by Pope Boniface VIII on 18 November 1302, asserted, quote, "It is a law of the divinity that the lowest things reach the highest place by intermediaries," end quote, meaning heaven can only be reached through the intermediary imposers known as priests. Quote, "We declare, we proclaim, we define that it is absolutely necessary for salvation that every human creature be subject to the Roman pontiff." End quote. Thus, all humans must submit themselves to subjugation of the Roman pontiff in order to reach salvation in the form that only he can prescribe and through his intermediary agents, the priests. Quote, "Both referring to two swords wielded by church and state, therefore are in the power of the church, that is to say, the spiritual and the material sword. But the former is to be administered for the church, but the latter by the church. The former in the hands of the priest, the latter by the hands of kings and soldiers, but at the will and sufferance of the priest." End quote. This clearly stating that the spiritual plane, for the souls, is administered, controlled, and protected by the priests for the church and pontiff, and the material plane, made up of the flesh and the land, are to be administered when military occupation, as implemented centuries later by the kings and soldiers, who implement this at the will and sufferance, or allowance, of the priests. Dum Diversas, papal bull promulgated by Pope Nicholas V on 18 June 1452 that asserted, quote, "We grant you, kings of Spain and Portugal, by these present documents, with our apostolic authority, full and free permission to invade, search out, capture, and subjugate the Saracens and pagans and any other unbelievers and enemies of Christ wherever they may be, as well as their kingdoms, duchies, counties, principalities, and other property, and to reduce their persons into perpetual servitude." End quote. Thus, if one is already submitted to subjugation of the Church as defined in the quotes above, the Church controls them by bondage and indenture, and if there are those not in the fold, then they are either Saracens, Muslims, or pagans, which is all inclusive of the rest of humanity, all of whom shall be reduced to perpetual servitude, i.e., slavery. Romanus Pontifex, papal bull promulgated by Pope Nicholas V to King Alfonso V of Portugal, January 8, 1455, as a follow-up to the Dum Diversas, and asserts the authority of said king, quote, "To invade, search out, capture, vanquish, and subdue all Saracens and pagans whatsoever, and other enemies of Christ wheresoever placed, and the kingdoms, dukedoms, principalities, dominions, possessions, and all movable and immovable goods whatsoever held and possessed by them, and to reduce their persons to perpetual slavery." End quote. And as further evidenced in and by such quoted statements in Aeternis Regis, the papal bull of Pope Sixtus IV, promulgated in June 12, 1481, referring to the presumed absolute possessions of the kings and princes of Spain and Portugal as representative of all so-called heads of state, as follows, quote, "Their kingdoms in the status of possession or quasi-possession which they hold over all, or over any other islands, shores, sea-coasts, or lands discovered or to be discovered, found or to be found." End quote. Everything in the Americas, north and south, all of Africa, and all of the Orient. Quote, "Over the islands already discovered, nor over whatever islands shall be found or acquired from beyond the Canaries." End quote. In North and South America and beyond. Quote, "Or the said lands, shores, or coasts discovered or to be discovered in the name or under the authority of the said lords, King and Prince of Portugal, or of their successors." End quote. This was then followed by the requerimiento, requirement as applicable to the conquered people, of 1514, which ended with, quote, "If you do not do this, however," meaning subject yourself to the will and control of the priests as the representatives of the Pontius Maximus, or resort maliciously to delay, "we warn you that, with the aid of God, we will enter your land against you with force, and will make war in every place and by every means we can and are able, and we will then subject you to the yoke and authority of the Church and their highnesses. We will take you and your wives and children and make them slaves, and as such we will sell them, and will dispose of you and them as their highnesses order. And we will take your property, and will do to you all the harm and evil we can, as is done to vassals who will not obey their lord, or who do not wish to accept him, or who resist and defy him. We avow that the deaths and harm which you will receive thereby will be your own blame, and not that of their highnesses, nor ours, nor of the gentlemen who come with us." End quote. Thus, not only doing all harm and evil to those so taken by force, but then blaming them for such events due to those so harmed, having resorted to delay or refusal to bend the knee and voluntarily subjugate themselves to the Church and their highnesses. For a last and final reference point, all are directed to have a look at the papal bull Convocation, promulgated by Pope Paul III on May 22, 1537, to summons an ecumenical council, known as the Council of Trent, in which it was stated that such council was for the purposes of, quote, "the elimination of heresy and heretics." End quote. All of this set the foundation for two important events following the last papal bull in 1537 to complete the doctrine of discovery and the three testamentary trusts, which are the issuance of the First Sesquicentennial Act of 1540 and the referenced Ecumenical Council, meaning the Council of Trent, convened from 1540 to 1564 to organize the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits, and their military intentions to conquer the entire world, to implement these mandates over the next 500 years, and by definition, to eliminate all choice. Seems pretty plain to see that the evident intention of this series of proclaimed as unimpeachable decrees is that all choice and sovereign will shall be eliminated, and those who do not comply are to be put to death, and those who do comply are the possessions of the vicar or pontiff or pope, as he is the only path to salvation, and all must come through his intermediaries, the priests of the law. These three crowns are then linked and associated with three layers of the Sesquicentennial structure to bind living flesh to the aristocracy and their land-based estates issued by land grants made patent by the kings, and to superimpose these into the fictional realm of the Sesquicentennial Trust, holding limited beneficial interest and use in the property of each franchise. This is described as follows. The crown of Baal, known as the papal tiara and triregnum, is a three-tiered jeweled papal crown and symbol of claimed papal supremacy. Since the 16th century, it has been featured prominently as part of the coat of arms of the Vatican, usually with the crossed keys of claims of authority from St. Peter. Any text or other claim that alleges the three-tiered crown that is older than the 16th century is deliberately false. Prior to Pope Boniface VIII, the antipopes of the Roman death cult wore fabric, not metallic headdresses, similar to the Persian high priests of Mithras. However, in 1302, Boniface issued his infamous papal bull Unam Sanctam, being the first express trust claiming control over the whole planet and effectively claiming the position of king of the world. In celebration, he commissioned a gold-plated headdress in the shape of pine cone with an elaborate crown at its base. The pine cone is an ancient symbol of fertility and one traditionally associated with Baal as well as the cult of Cybele. It is also a symbol of the third eye, which provides multidimensional sight and the ability to see beyond the ruse of this controlled matrix hologram, thus indicating that the Pope shall also control that function in the population as well. The first crown of Crown Land. While Pope Boniface VIII was the first leader in history to create the concept of a trust, the first testamentary trust through a deed and will creating a deceased estate was not created until Pope Nicholas V in 1455 through the papal bull Romanus Pontifex. This is only one of three papal bulls to include the line with the incipit, quote, "for a perpetual remembrance," end quote. This papal bull had the effect of conveying the right of use of the land as real property from the express trust unam sanctum to the control of the pontiff and his successors in perpetuity. Hence, all land is claimed as crown land. This first crown was represented by the first Sestakevi trust, created when a child is born, depriving them of all their beneficial entitlements and rights on the land at birth. The second crown of the Commonwealth. The second crown was created in 1481 with the papal bull Aeterni Regis, meaning eternal crown, by Sixtus IV, being only the second of three papal bulls as deeds of testamentary trusts, thus indicating the function of deeds of trust, where an issued deed from a private trust is only a bond or certificate as evidence of the trust and not the substance of it, thereby establishing the function whereby these three testamentary trusts are effectively purporting to take control of the land, flesh, and souls of the world, and only issue deeds of trust to the people, i.e., commercial and negotiable paper. This papal bull created what is known as the Crown of Aragon, later known as the Crown of Spain, being the highest sovereign and highest steward of all Roman slaves subject to the rule of the Roman pontiff. Spain lost the crown in 1604, when it was granted to King James I of England by Pope Paul V after the successful passage of the Union of Crowns, or Commonwealth, in 1605. Following the false flag operation of the Gunpowder Plot. The crown was finally lost by England in 1975, when it was returned to Spain and King Carlos I, where it remains to this day. This second crown is represented by the second Sestakevi trust, which is created when a child is born, being the sale of the birth certificate as a bond to the private central bank of the nation, depriving the children of ownership of their flesh and condemning them to perpetual servitude as a Roman person or slave. The third crown of the ecclesiastical see. The third crown was created in 1537 by Paul III through the papal bull Convocation, also meant to open the Council of Trent, being the third and final testamentary deed and will of a testamentary trust, being the trust set up for the claiming of all lost souls lost to the sea of commerce. The Venetians assisted in the creation of the first Sestakevi Act of 1540 to use this papal bull as the basis of ecclesiastical authority of Henry VIII. This crown was secretly granted to England in the collection and reaping of lost souls, thereafter becoming the Crown Corporation of the City of London. The crown was lost in 1815 due to the deliberate bankruptcy of England and granted to the Temple Bar, which became known as the Crown Bar, or simply the Crown. This was done as a progressive occurrence over 300 years, not just a singular event in a specific year. The bar associations have been responsible ever since in administering the reaping of the souls of the lost and damned, including the registration and collection of baptismal certificates, which includes birth certificates, as all beings are baptized by being submerged under water in debt by the Sea of Commerce, representing the souls collected by the Vatican and stored in its vaults. This third crown is represented by the third Sestakevi trust, created when a child is baptized, being the grant of the baptismal certificate by the parents to the church or registrar as the gift of title of the soul. Thus, without legal title over one's own soul, a man or woman may be legally denied right to stand as a living being, but may be treated as a creature and thing without legally possessing a soul. Hence, why the Bar Association is able to legally enforce maritime law against men and women, because they can be treated as things, cargo, that does not possess a soul. The above description is found in numerous places on the Internet, without identifying the original author, although it is likely originally from Frank O'Collins, who posted all his writings and materials on numerous websites that have recently been removed and converted to a private membership foundation. The key of the above content is that the rite of baptism is one conforming to the submergence of the living being under water, to place the being into debt and subjugation. Since the entire world system is based on the function of 3 strikes and you are out, baptism is followed by communion and confirmation, to confirm the being's choice to be so placed. The secular equivalent of the baptismal certificate is the so-called birth certificate, which also places the being underwater. To see how endemic into the consciousness the meme of Triple Crown is infiltrated, a simple search in Google Images for Triple Crown suffices to demonstrate the fact. In the year 1666, the reconstruction of the City of London was commenced after the Great Fire of London in 1665. The Great Fire cleared the land so that the city could be rebuilt. This is the home of the Crown Corporation, the Temple Bar, the 4 Inns of Court, and the center of the global financial system. There is only one corporation on the planet. Every other corporation is a subdivision as a joint stock company thereof, which is why they are incorporated into the master corporation. The joint stock is the containment created by the stockade in which to corral the chattel or cattle or people, and to create a wall to bring the slaves to for auction and branding them as a secured interest. Now, there are millions of corporations, all of which have a brand name and image, all seeking to sear their brand into the minds of the people through repetition and immersion. Within the city is the office of the Exchequer, which is the location of the Arch-Treasurer of the Holy Roman Empire. The word arc references the arc of the sun as it crosses the sky every day, the primary source of power in this world, and hence the primary construct of the entire esoteric and symbolic system developed and perfected over thousands of years. It is this arc that sits atop the 2 pillars, and is variously named the Ark of Anu, the Mantle of Yahweh, and the Yoke of the World. In the Citibank logo, we find the perfected image of all discussed herein above, where the 2 pillars are covered by the ark, and the T in the middle is the crucified life force, and the hook at the bottom for catching the fish underwater, arcing over the 2 forces represented by the 2 pillars, all held in the totality of the city, London, Crown Corporation. In the city, we find the 4 Inns of Court and the Temple Bar, where all legal codes and oath-taking priests must pass the bar, with the ultimate purpose and intent to register everything as Crown property via the Internet of Things. This is now getting down to every iota, defined as an infinitesimal amount. The bar-carrying attorneys, as legal privateers, are thus armed with their letters of marque and reprisal, with which they board and capture enemy vessels, and bring them to port to undergo legal plunder in the name of the king or sovereign or crown. The first corporate merger, Israel. The entire world system is a synthesis of the solar, lunar, and stellar cults of ancient civilizations. The 3 primary godheads for these are Isis, Amen, Ra, and El, Elyon. The merging of these 3 cults in ancient times can be seen as the first transnational global merger. When we combine the first 2 or last 2 letters of each name, we get Israel. Thus, we have the basis for the eschatological end-time expectation of Zion in the land of Israel, where the King of the world shall take his temporal throne in the vicarious anticipation, never to be realized, of the purported true king returning for his kingdom. It is a mythological fiction designed to entrance and entrain the peoples of the world in a future expectation, whilst their world is taken away from them right out from under their feet. When someone completes a prayer, the invocation is to Amen-Ra, the Hidden One. The arch is the Ark of the Sun, considered the vault of heaven, the mantle of Anu, the soul containment system, also known as solar logos. That ark sits atop every entrance to every temple, with two pillars that flank the entrance and the mantle cross top that binds the two. This is the root of the word monarch, where the false female goddess Mon is combined with the false male authority as the Ark of the Sun, and giving the so-called divine right of kings as justification for all manner of evil and destruction. In between is the binding of the slaves, symbolized by the image on every Social Security card in the United States. It requires the employee signature, and in the system, the term employee means specifically an employee of the government. A living man cannot be an employee. Only a dead fiction can be an employee. The placing of the wet ink signature between the two pillars and under the ark is the attachment of the living flesh to the law of the priest by voluntary binding agreement. It is the life force that consents to attach itself to the interior control of the temple, the temporal timeline containment buildings of Kronos/Saturn, or L, constructed along the lines of so-called sacred geometry, proportion, phi ratio, and golden mean spirals. Many proclaim the virtue of these things, yet fail to see that they are in fact worshipping the attractively spaced bars of their own prison. Thus, Ice represents the lunar goddess cult, Ra represents the hidden god, the AI control and containment matrix, and L represents the arc of power and authority of the false sun god, all to fulfill the intent of Zion. The polarities of male-female dark-light with the binary code I-O in the middle. When we have a look at the constructs of words through etymology, the root of words, and words that have the same sound but have different meanings, such as the words see and see, which are known as homophones, there is no accident in how control through the mind is perpetrated and maintained through programmed language. Therefore, being lost at sea is a homophonic equivalent of being lost and controlled in the Holy See. There are, of course, many other permutations of that. The Holy See can see all through its pineal covering triple crown of the third eye overlaying the all-seeing eye. The point being that the Holy See controls the maritime, admiralty, merchant law of the sea to implement the law of the priest to bind us by consensual agreement in the posited sea of commerce. As creator beings, when we agree to something contractually, we are bound to it. We have agreed to be bound to commercial paper known as negotiable instruments, which are securities that bind our life force and beingness as the surety, guarantor, and debt servicer. We must be licensed to operate in commerce because commerce is illegal. We have gone to sea in the sea of commerce, and because we do not know who we are and are separate from the essence of our own lives, we are effectively lost at sea. When we have a look at the many names of the goddess after Isis, we find the etymological roots of key words in the world system having to do with time and money. The words money and monetary are derived from the goddess name Mon, a lunar goddess, and thus establishing the foundation of money as lunacy. Minutes, ministry, minister, administer, and minutia come from the goddess name Min, binding us to the goddess of time and the star goddess of ministrations. The names Istara, Ishtar, Astara, Aster, and Esther provide us with the derivations of the words astronomy, asterism, aster, all with reference to the stellar cult and the stars above that provide navigation for the ships of the sea. When we combine min with aster, we have minister and ministry, the control of the population through ministerial priesthoods in the name of the false goddesses. Mon, as money, ties in with the all-seeing eye, as the word money is a combination of mon plus I, the singular eye that sees all and controls all. Power is vested in a singular authority, the monarch, the goddess, and the solar power. Another interesting word set is testament, testimony, and testify, the root of which is testi. This is the male regenerative principle, as in testes and testicles, and when we are brought into court, we are required to place our testicles on the line, our seed and our genetics, to bind them to the temple of Baal and the bench of the judge. A testament, or testamentary trust, binds the genetic code through the male principle to the mind, testamenti. When we bind ourselves by testimony, when we swear on a Bible, we are binding our life force to the law of the priest, and allowing the priest, by operation of his law, to create bonds or money out of it, hence testimony. There are many, many instances of language and words that take us into the roots of our own enslavement, too many for this discussion, so these are just key instances and examples.